Right now, at this exact moment, Iranian military commanders are claiming they possess the capability to simultaneously sink 3 American aircraft carriers operating in the Persian Gulf region. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy just published detailed tactical assessments explaining exactly how they would execute coordinated strikes against the most powerful warships on Earth. U.S. Central Command dismissed the claims as propaganda and strategic posturing designed to influence ongoing nuclear negotiations. But here's what makes this different from every previous Iranian threat. They're providing specific weapon systems, precise attack vectors, and tactical coordination frameworks that defense analysts are taking seriously enough to publish formal assessments. This isn't abstract saber rattling. This is Iran publicly wargaming carrier strike group destruction, while American and Iranian diplomats prepare for critical talks in Muscat, scheduled for Friday. Let me walk you through exactly what happened and why this represents a fundamental shift in how Iran publicly discusses confrontation with American naval power. At 0900 hours Tehran time on Tuesday, March 9, 2026, Rear Admiral Alireza Tangsiri, commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, delivered a televised address from an undisclosed location in southern Iran. Tangsiri appeared in full military dress uniform flanked by large-format tactical displays showing the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Gulf of Oman with marked positions of American naval assets. He stated, and I'm translating directly from the Farsi broadcast, that Iranian forces have developed and tested integrated attack protocols capable of engaging 3 American carrier strike groups simultaneously through coordinated ballistic missile, cruise missile, drone swarm, and fast attack craft operations executed within a compressed time frame, preventing effective defensive response. 30 minutes after Tangsiri's address concluded, Iran's state-affiliated Tasnim news agency published a detailed infographic illustrating the multi-domain attack sequence with specific weapon system designations and estimated time-on-target calculations. At 1100 hours, U.S. Central Command posted a brief statement on social media platform X stating that Iranian capabilities remain unchanged and that American carrier strike groups maintain defensive superiority against all regional threats. At 1300 hours, the Institute for the Study of War in Washington published preliminary analysis noting that while Iranian claims contain significant exaggeration, the underlying tactical framework reflects genuine evolution in Iranian anti-access area denial doctrine. At 1500 hours, satellite imagery from commercial provider Planet Labs showed the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group operating approximately 200 nautical miles southeast of the Strait of Hormuz in the Arabian Sea. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Strike Group positioned in the eastern Mediterranean Sea, and the USS Carl Vinson Strike Group conducting operations in the South China Sea. None of the carrier groups have altered their operational patterns following the Iranian announcement, though multiple reconnaissance aircraft launches from the Lincoln were detected throughout Tuesday afternoon. To understand whether Iran's claim has any basis in reality, you need to understand the specific weapon systems they would employ and the tactical challenges of actually hitting a maneuvering aircraft carrier battle group. Iran's primary anti-ship ballistic missile is the Khalij Fars, a modified version of the Fateh 110 short-range ballistic missile specifically designed for maritime strike missions. The Khalij Fars has an estimated range of 300 kilometers, travels at speeds exceeding Mach 3 during terminal phase, and employs an electro-optical seeker for terminal guidance, allowing it to track and maneuver toward moving targets. This is not a traditional ballistic missile following a predictable parabolic arc. The Khalij Fars performs evasive maneuvers during descent, making interception significantly more difficult than standard ballistic threats. Iran claims to possess several hundred Khalij Fars missiles in operational inventory, though independent verification of those numbers remains impossible. The second weapon system in Iran's carrier threat toolkit is the Qatar cruise missile, an upgraded variant of the Chinese C-802 anti-ship cruise missile produced domestically under license. The Qatar has a range of 300 kilometers, travels at high subsonic speeds just above the ocean surface to minimize radar detection, and carries a 200-kilogram high-explosive warhead. What makes the Qatar particularly concerning is Iran's demonstrated ability to launch salvos of 12 to 16 missiles simultaneously from mobile coastal launchers, creating saturation attack scenarios that strain defensive systems. Iran also deploys the Noor anti-ship cruise missile, another domestically produced variant of the C-802, with similar capabilities but slightly shorter range at 200 kilometers. The third component of Iran's anti-carrier strategy involves unmanned aerial systems, specifically the Shahed-136 loitering munition that gained international attention through its extensive use in Ukraine, and the Shahed-191 stealth combat drone. The Shahed-136 is a one-way attack drone with a 50-kilogram warhead, 2,000-kilometer range, and extremely low radar cross-section, making detection and interception challenging. Iran could launch swarms of dozens or even hundreds of Shahed-136 drones from coastal facilities, offshore islands, or naval vessels, overwhelming point defense systems through sheer numbers. The Shahed-191 is a larger, stealthier platform resembling the American RQ-170 Sentinel drone that Iran captured in 2011. While primarily a reconnaissance platform, the Shahed-191 could be modified for strike missions, and its stealth characteristics would complicate defensive engagement. The fourth element involves Iran's fast attack craft fleet, specifically the Siraj-1 class catamarans, armed with multiple Nasr anti-ship cruise missiles. These small vessels have minimal radar signatures, operate at speeds exceeding 50 knots, and could launch coordinated swarm attacks from multiple vectors simultaneously. Iran maintains approximately 50 fast attack craft of various classes dispersed across numerous small naval bases along the 2,000-kilometer Persian Gulf coastline. Now, here's the critical strategic question. Could Iran actually coordinate all these weapon systems into a single overwhelming attack that defeats American carrier defenses? The answer involves understanding both Iranian capabilities and American defensive systems. The core of Carrier Strike Group Air Defense is the Aegis Combat System, specifically the AN/SPY-1D radar, integrated with SM-2, SM-3, and SM-6 interceptor missiles aboard Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and Ticonderoga-class cruisers. The SPY-1D provides 360-degree coverage with simultaneous tracking of over 100 targets and the capability to engage multiple threats concurrently. Each destroyer carries approximately 90 vertical launch system cells that can be loaded with various combinations of interceptors depending on mission requirements. An SM-6 interceptor costs approximately $4 million and has demonstrated capability against supersonic cruise missiles, ballistic missiles in terminal phase, and even low-altitude aircraft. The mathematical challenge for American defenses is magazine depth. If Iran launches a saturation attack involving 50 College-Fars ballistic missiles, 80 Qatar and Noor cruise missiles, 100 Shahed-136 drones, and 30 fast attack craft, each carrying 4 Nasr missiles for an additional 120 missiles, that's 350 incoming threats. A typical carrier strike group includes 1 carrier, 2 destroyers, 1 cruiser, and 1 submarine, providing approximately 300 interceptor missiles total across the surface. Combatants. Even with 90% interception success rate, which would be extraordinarily high against a sophisticated multi-domain attack, 10 to 15 threats would leak through the defensive screen. A single College-Fars ballistic missile hitting the flight deck could render the carrier unable to launch or recover aircraft. Multiple cruise missile hits could cause catastrophic damage to island structure, disabling command and control capabilities. This is the nightmare scenario that keeps American naval planners awake at night. But here's what Iran's public presentation doesn't acknowledge. Executing that level of coordinated attack requires surveillance, targeting, battle damage assessment, and command and control infrastructure that Iran may not possess at sufficient sophistication. To target 3 carriers simultaneously, Iran needs real-time, precise location data for all 3 strike groups. American carriers don't broadcast their positions, and they maneuver continuously, making targeting moving vessels across hundreds of kilometers of ocean extremely challenging. Iran would need to maintain continuous surveillance through reconnaissance aircraft, over-the-horizon radar systems, satellite coverage, or human intelligence networks tracking carrier movements. While Iran operates some surveillance drones and has launched military reconnaissance satellites, their persistent coverage capability remains limited compared to American space-based and airborne surveillance networks. According to Dr. Jeffrey Lewis, director of the East Asia Non-Proliferation Program at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies, Iran's satellite constellation lacks the resolution, revisit rates, and real-time data transmission capability necessary for dynamic maritime targeting against maneuvering high-value assets. Even if Iran obtains target coordinates at launch time, a carrier traveling at 30 knots covers 55 kilometers during the hour-long flight time of a ballistic missile from inland launch sites. The targeting solution requires predictive algorithms estimating carrier position at missile arrival time, which becomes exponentially more complex if the carrier executes evasive maneuvers after detecting launch signatures. Iran's claims also assume that American forces would remain passive during attack preparation. In reality, American surveillance would detect massive missile launch preparations, drone swarm assemblies, and fast attack craft sortie activities hours or even days before execution. The United States maintains continuous signals intelligence collection against Iranian military communications, space-based infrared sensors detecting missile launches within seconds, and reconnaissance aircraft orbiting Gulf airspace, monitoring Iranian military installations. This early warning would enable American forces to execute preemptive strikes, destroying missiles on launchers, sinking fast attack craft before they reach launch positions, and degrading Iranian command and control networks before coordinated attack becomes possible. From Iran's strategic perspective, these public claims serve multiple purposes beyond literal military capability. First, they function as deterrent signaling designed to increase perceived costs of American military action against Iranian nuclear facilities or regional interests. If American policymakers believe that striking Iran would result in carrier losses and thousands of American casualties, they become less likely to authorize military operations regardless of provocation. Second, the claims strengthen Iran's negotiating position in upcoming diplomatic talks. By demonstrating or claiming to demonstrate Kita Somkar, Bao Sangchanto, Bao Funtur, Dao Sor, Anger's escalation dominance in the Persian Gulf. Iran signals that it negotiates from position of strength rather than weakness. Third, the detailed tactical presentation serves domestic political purposes, showing Iranian hardliners and the general population that the Islamic Republic possesses credible military options and hasn't been rendered helpless by American technological superiority. According to Dr. Afshan Ostavar, Associate Professor of National Security Affairs at the Naval Postgraduate School and author of Vanguard of the Imam, Religion, Politics, and Iran's Revolutionary Guards, the Revolutionary Guards regularly amplify military capabilities through public demonstrations and announcements because their institutional legitimacy depends on maintaining perception that they provide effective defense against external threats, particularly from the United States and Israel. From the American strategic calculus, these Iranian claims create complex risk assessment challenges. On one hand, dismissing Iranian capabilities as pure propaganda could lead to dangerous overconfidence and inadequate defensive posturing. Even if Iran's coordination and targeting capabilities fall short of their claims, they demonstrably possess individual weapon systems capable of threatening carrier strike groups under certain circumstances. The United States military takes anti-access area denial threats seriously, which is why carrier operations in the Persian Gulf have become relatively rare compared to positioning in the Arabian Sea or Gulf of Oman, where greater standoff distance provides additional defensive depth. On the other hand, this overreacting to Iranian claims by withdrawing carriers from the region entirely would hand Iran a strategic victory without firing a shot, demonstrating that threats alone can modify American force posture and potentially encouraging further escalatory rhetoric. According to retired Admiral James Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander Europe and Dean Emeritus of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, the appropriate American response involves maintaining credible forward presence while implementing enhanced defensive measures, including increased air patrols, more aggressive counter-reconnaissance operations against Iranian surveillance platforms, and potentially reinforcing carrier strike groups with additional destroyers and cruisers, providing deeper defensive magazines. The historical precedent that most closely parallels the current situation is the Cold War Soviet strategy for attacking American carrier battle groups using coordinated submarine, bomber, and surface ship attacks. Soviet naval doctrine explicitly recognized that individual platforms couldn't defeat American carrier defenses, so they developed complex multi-domain attacks launching from multiple vectors simultaneously. NATO conducted extensive war games throughout the 1970s and 80s, testing defensive responses to Soviet saturation attacks. Those exercises revealed that even with advanced Aegis systems, carrier groups faced genuine vulnerability against sophisticated coordinated attacks involving dozens of simultaneous threats. The key difference between Cold War Soviet capabilities and current Iranian capabilities is that the Soviet Union possessed global surveillance networks, sophisticated targeting systems, and extensive training in complex multi-domain operations that Iran lacks. However, the Persian Gulf's confined geography partially compensates for Iranian technological limitations by reducing the surveillance and targeting challenge. In the relatively small waters of the Gulf, maintaining persistent awareness of American carrier positions becomes more achievable than tracking carriers across the vast Pacific Ocean. There are three primary scenarios for how this crisis could develop over the coming days and weeks. Scenario 1 is diplomatic de-escalation, where the Iranian announcement functions purely as negotiating leverage ahead of nuclear talks, and both sides return to lower tension baseline after talks conclude either successfully or unsuccessfully. This scenario has approximately 35% probability. For this pathway to materialize, the talks in Muscat would need to show genuine progress toward at least procedural agreements, if not substantive compromises. The United States would need to avoid provocative military responses like significantly enhanced carrier presence or aggressive freedom of navigation operations near Iranian territorial waters. Iran would need to avoid follow-on demonstrations of anti-ship capabilities like publicized missile tests or fast attack craft exercises that could spiral into unintended escalation. Both sides would need to allow the rhetoric to fade from headlines without feeling compelled to prove their respective positions through action. Scenario 2 is controlled escalation, where one or both sides demonstrate resolve through limited military actions that signal seriousness without triggering full-scale conflict. This scenario has approximately 45% probability, making it the most likely near-term trajectory. This pathway could involve the United States increasing carrier presence by moving a strike group closer to the Strait of Hormuz, or conducting highly visible freedom of navigation operations through the strait itself. Iran might respond with anti-ship missile tests against maritime targets in the Gulf of Oman, or large-scale fast attack craft exercises simulating swarm tactics. Both sides would aim to demonstrate capability while avoiding direct engagement between forces. The risk in this scenario is miscalculation, where a demonstration intended as signaling gets interpreted as preparation for actual attack, triggering preemptive action by the other side. According to Dr. Michael Eisenstadt, Director of Military and Security Studies at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, controlled escalation scenarios depend on both sides maintaining clear communications through back-channel diplomatic contacts and demonstrating restraint in interpreting ambiguous activities. If those communication channels function effectively and both sides carefully calibrate their demonstrations to avoid crossing red lines, controlled escalation can actually reduce long-term crisis probability by clarifying where boundaries exist. Scenario 3 is catastrophic escalation, where either deliberate decisions or accidents trigger direct military confrontation between American and Iranian forces, resulting in significant casualties and potential regional war. This scenario has approximately 20% probability, the lowest of the three, but still dangerously possible. Catastrophic escalation could begin with Iranian forces attempting to seize or disable an American vessel to demonstrate that their capabilities aren't merely theoretical, If Revolutionary Guard fast attack craft engage an American destroyer or attempt harassment operations against the carrier itself, American forces would respond with overwhelming force, potentially sinking numerous Iranian vessels and striking coastal launch facilities. Iran would face immense domestic pressure to retaliate for killed service members, likely launching ballistic missiles at American bases in Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait. The United States would then execute large-scale strikes against Iranian military infrastructure, potentially including nuclear facilities. Within 72 to 96 hours, the region could be engulfed in the widest Middle East conflict since the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, with potential spillover involving Israel striking Iranian proxies in Lebanon and Syria, Houthi forces in Yemen attacking Saudi and Emirati targets, and possible temporary closure of the Strait of Hormuz, disrupting 20% of global oil supplies. Watch for 5 critical indicators over the next 72 hours that will reveal which scenario is materializing. First, carrier movement patterns. If any American carrier strike group enters the Persian Gulf itself rather than remaining in the Arabian Sea or Gulf of Oman, that signals increased willingness to accept risk and potentially preparation for offensive operations. Second, Iranian military exercises. If Iran announces or conducts large-scale naval exercises in the coming week, particularly involving missile launches or fast attack craft operations, that represents an attempt to validate their public claims and demonstrate capability. Third, diplomatic communications. If either American or Iranian officials announce that Muscat talks will be postponed, shortened, or canceled, that indicates diplomatic track has failed and military posturing becomes more likely. Fourth, oil market reactions. Current prices are approximately $78 per barrel for Brent crude. If prices spike above $85, that indicates markets are pricing in genuine conflict probability above baseline levels. Fifth, third-party responses. Watch for statements or actions from China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. If any of these actors begin repositioning military forces, evacuating diplomatic personnel, or issuing unusually strong warnings, they likely possess intelligence suggesting escalation probability has increased significantly. The diplomatic talks scheduled for Friday in Muscat represent the clearest potential off-ramp from current tensions. Both sides have strong incentives to avoid actual military confrontation, even as they engage in public posturing. Iran's economy remains devastated by years of maximum pressure sanctions and cannot sustain costs of regional war. The United States faces multiple competing priorities, including Ukraine support, strategic competition with China, and domestic political constraints, limiting appetite for new Middle East military commitments. If talks produce even minimal progress toward procedural agreements on nuclear monitoring or sanctions relief timelines, that could provide foundation for de-escalation. I'm monitoring this situation continuously through satellite imagery providers tracking carrier movements, signals intelligence monitoring Iranian military communications, commercial shipping data showing Gulf transit patterns, and diplomatic reporting on the Muscat talks. When the next development breaks, whether that's announcement of talk outcomes, Iranian military exercises, carrier positioning changes, or any escalatory incident, I'll have immediate analysis explaining what it means and where we're heading. You need to understand this crisis because it directly affects global oil markets, American force posture worldwide, and broader Middle East stability dynamics that influence everything from terrorism threats to great power competition. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on all notifications. You won't get this level of detailed technical analysis from mainstream media coverage. When headlines report that Iran made threats against carriers, you'll already understand the specific weapon systems, the realistic capability assessments, the strategic calculations driving both American and Iranian decisions, and the scenario frameworks determining whether we're heading toward war or diplomacy. Hit that subscribe button because the next 72 hours are critical. Drop a comment answering these questions. Do you think Iran actually has the coordination capability to execute simultaneous attacks against 3 carriers? Do you think the United States will move carriers closer to demonstrate resolve or maintain current standoff distance? Do you think the Muscat talks will succeed in reducing tensions or fail? and increase conflict probability. I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know your analysis based on the evidence I've presented. This is a threshold moment. Iran has publicly laid out a specific theory of victory against American naval power. The United States has publicly rejected those claims. Within days, we'll learn whether this was pure strategic signaling ahead of negotiations or whether one or both sides feels compelled to demonstrate their positions through action. The talks are scheduled for Friday. The carriers are in position. The missiles are ready. Everything happens in the next 72 hours.